Jack Ryan stood quietly at the edge of the landing platform, his wetsuit glistening under the alien sun. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, its surface calm and deceptive, masking the treacherous depths below. Behind him, the Galactic Marines bustled, their voices loud and brimming with confidence. Advanced aquatic drones hovered nearby, sleek and silent, ready to plunge into the mission at a moment's notice. The Marines, dressed in their high-tech exosuits, barely spared a glance at the SEALs. To them, Earth soldiers were relics, obsolete in a galaxy dominated by technology. "They still use oxygen tanks," one Marine muttered under his breath, loud enough for the SEALs to hear. The group of Marines around him laughed, their mechanical exosuits whirring with every movement. Jack's face remained impassive, his steel-blue eyes scanning the horizon, unmoved by the taunts. "Primitive," Captain Drax, the Galactic Marines' leader, said with a smirk. He strode toward Jack, his exosuit enhancing every step, making him appear larger than life. "You really think your boys can keep up down there?" He gestured toward the water, his tone dripping with condescension. Jack finally turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "We've been doing this for a while," he said simply, his voice calm and steady. "We'll be fine." Drax scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "Sure, but this isn't Earth. This ocean is deeper than anything your planet has. The caves down there? They'll chew you up and spit you out. You should stick to shallow waters." Jack didn't rise to the bait. He dealt with arrogance like this before, usually from rookies who hadn't seen real combat. "We'll manage," he said, turning back to his team. They were already prepping their gear, checking and rechecking every piece of equipment. No fancy exosuits, no drones. Just the men and their training. Drax snorted and moved off, barking orders to his Marines. Jack watched them for a moment, the over-reliance on tech glaringly obvious. These Marines hadn't learned how to adapt, how to trust their instincts. They leaned on their gadgets, and Jack knew that in the caves below, those gadgets would fail. "Commander," one of his SEALs, Miller, approached, his voice low. "The Marines think they own this mission." "They'll learn," Jack replied. He strapped his mask to his face, the weight of the ocean already pressing against his thoughts. "We move out in 5. Stay sharp." The mission was straightforward on paper. Infiltrate an underwater cave system, locate an enemy stronghold, and neutralize it. The Galactic Marines were tasked with leading, given their advanced tech. Jack's SEALs were there as backup, though he knew they would end up doing most of the heavy lifting. As the minutes ticked down, the SEALs silently prepared, a stark contrast to the Marines' loud confidence. The plunge into the water was instant silence. The ocean swallowed them whole, the vast expanse of blue stretching endlessly in every direction. The Galactic Marines darted ahead, their drones lighting the way, while Jack and his team descended at a slower, more measured pace. He kept his breathing steady, the familiar rhythm calming his nerves. Down here, the water felt alien, colder, heavier than Earth's oceans. The caves loomed ahead, dark and uninviting. Jack knew the Marines would rely on their tech to navigate, but he trusted his instincts. He signaled to his team, and they adjusted their course, angling toward the cave's entrance with practiced precision. Inside the cave, the darkness was suffocating. The Marines, charging ahead, barely noticed how narrow the tunnels became, how the walls seemed to close in. Jack watched as one of their drones sputtered, its lights flickering before it dropped lifeless to the cave floor. "We've lost signal!" Drax's voice crackled over the comms, the first hint of uncertainty creeping in. Jack didn't respond. He glanced at his team, their eyes sharp and focused, waiting for his lead. He signaled, and they moved silently through the cave, hugging the walls, avoiding any unnecessary noise. They had trained for environments like this, where tech failed and instincts took over. "Damn it! I can't see anything," one of the Marines cursed, his voice echoing in the tight space. Their advanced suits, too bulky for the narrow caves, were becoming liabilities. Jack and his SEALs slid past them, moving with ease through the constricting tunnels. "Commander, we've reached the target." Miller's voice came through, steady and sure. Jack checked his surroundings. The enemy base was just ahead, hidden deep within the labyrinth of caves. The Marines, still fumbling with their equipment, were too far behind to make a difference. Jack signaled to his team, and they moved in, their training taking over. The enemy hadn't expected them. Within minutes, the SEALs had neutralized the threat, their movements swift and deadly. Jack allowed himself a moment to breathe, knowing the hard part was done. "We're clear," Jack reported over the comms. Drax's voice crackled back, full of frustration. "We lost 3 drones. This place is a mess." "We've handled it," Jack replied calmly. He didn't offer any further explanation. The results spoke for themselves. As the SEALs regrouped, Jack caught a glimpse of Drax's face through the dark waters, his pride clearly wounded. Jack didn't rub it in. There was no need. They still had a mission to complete, and there would be plenty of time for the Marines to learn their lesson. "Let's get back topside," Jack said quietly to his team. They began their ascent, the water around them calm once more. Above the surface, the sun had barely moved in the sky. The mission had taken less time than expected. As the SEALs emerged, one by one, Jack couldn't help but glance back at the water, knowing that this was just the beginning. The real test was yet to come. The sun was still low on the horizon as the SEALs and Galactic Marines climbed back onto the platform. The air felt different, thicker, tenser. Captain Drax was scowling, his once smooth confidence now cracking around the edges. Jack Ryan had seen it before, the shift in demeanor when reality didn't align with overconfidence. "We handled it," Drax muttered to his second-in-command, eyes darting between his men and the SEALs. "Would have gone smoother if the damn tech didn't fail." Jack overheard, but said nothing. His team was already stowing their gear, their movements precise and disciplined. There was no need for gloating. The mission was over, and the results spoke for themselves. Still, he could feel the weight of the Marines' wounded pride settling over the platform like a thick fog. "Commander," Miller said quietly as he joined Jack, "the Marines don't look too happy." "They'll get over it," Jack replied, his voice steady. "We've got another mission coming. Focus on what's next." But Miller's eyes remained on the Marines, watching their tense postures and murmured conversations. "Yeah, but they don't seem like the type to let this slide." Jack followed Miller's gaze. Drax was pacing now, clearly trying to maintain control of the situation. His men were watching him, waiting for direction. The tension in the air wasn't just from the failed mission, it was from pride, the kind that had been shattered in the caves below. Jack knew it wouldn't take much for that pride to turn into something uglier. "Let's keep to ourselves for now," Jack said. "We don't need any distractions." The platform shifted underfoot as the command ship docked. A sharp hiss of hydraulics filled the air, followed by the clank of metal ramps lowering. Marines snapped to attention, but the SEALs moved with quiet efficiency, heading toward the next briefing without fanfare. Inside the command center, the temperature dropped noticeably, the cool air a welcome contrast to the oppressive humidity outside. Holographic maps flickered in the center of the room, displaying the complex underwater terrain they would face in the next mission. But Jack barely glanced at them. His focus was on the briefing officer, another Marine, who seemed far more nervous than he should have been. "We've encountered complications," the officer began, his voice tight. "The caves we explored earlier? They're only a small part of the system. Deeper down, there's a more intricate network. It's unstable." Drax crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "Unstable how?" "Seismic activity, unpredictable cave-ins. We can't send in the drones again, the interference scrambles their systems. And the deeper we go, the more intense the magnetic field becomes." Miller leaned closer to Jack, whispering, "Looks like we're going back in." Jack nodded subtly, his mind already racing through the new complications. Unstable caves, no tech, deeper dives. This wasn't just a repeat of the first mission, this was a whole new level of danger. "And what about the enemy base?" Drax asked, his voice laced with impatience. The officer hesitated. "We believe the base is deeper, in the most unstable part of the cave system. It's well hidden, and any approach could trigger collapses. We'll have to rely on manual navigation. Drax shot a glance at Jack, his expression hardening. So, we're supposed to do this with nothing but diving suits and gut instinct. Jack met his gaze, unflinching. Worked the first time. The tension between them was palpable, a silent challenge hanging in the air. Drax's pride was still raw, but Jack wasn't about to let that get in the way of the mission. He turned to the holographic map, studying the twisting tunnels and dark voids that represented the deeper cave network. Here, Jack said, pointing to a narrow passageway. This is the choke point. If we can secure this, we can control access to the rest of the caves. The enemy won't be able to move without us knowing. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the map. Drax's face tightened, but he couldn't argue with the logic. Finally, he nodded, though it was clear the decision pained him. Fine, he said, the words sounding like a reluctant concession. But we do this together. Jack gave a small nod, knowing that the cooperation was fragile at best. Together. The briefing ended quickly, and the teams dispersed to prepare. As the SEALs moved back to the gear room, the mood among them was calm, focused. But Jack could feel the undercurrent of tension building, not just between the SEALs and the Marines, but within the Marines themselves. Their confidence had been shaken, and they were looking for a way to regain control. Miller approached him again as they loaded up. Think they'll cooperate this time? They'll have to, Jack replied, his tone steady. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that this next mission was going to test more than their tactical skills. By the time they suited up and prepared for the second dive, the atmosphere on the platform was thick with unspoken resentment. The SEALs moved silently into the water, one by one, their movements fluid and practiced. Jack was the last to slip beneath the surface, his mind already focused on the mission ahead. As they descended into the darkness, the weight of the ocean pressed down on them. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. The caves loomed ahead, even more menacing than before, and the currents were stronger, pulling at them like unseen hands. Jack signaled to his team, and they adjusted their course, slipping into the narrow passageways. Behind them, the Marines struggled to keep pace, their larger suits hindering their movements in the confined spaces. Suddenly, the ground beneath them rumbled, a low, ominous sound that vibrated through the water. Jack felt it before he saw it, a collapse, rocks crashing down in the distance, cutting off their exit. Commander! Miller's voice crackled over the comms. The cave's shifting. We're losing ground. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained calm. Stay focused. We push forward. They had no choice now. The only way out was through. The cave walls pressed in from all sides, the passageway barely wide enough for Jack Ryan and his SEALs to maneuver. Their lights cut through the dark, revealing jagged rocks and debris from the recent collapse. The water was colder here, heavier, and it carried a tension that made every movement feel like a gamble. Jack led the way, his mind focused on the mission ahead, but the weight of the cave in behind them gnawed at the back of his thoughts. There was no going back. The only option now was forward, into deeper, more dangerous territory. Commander, sonar's picking up movement ahead. Miller's voice came over the comms, low but steady. Jack could hear the faint hum of concern beneath the professionalism. Copy that. Keep eyes on it, Jack responded, adjusting his trajectory. He glanced back at his team, their faces set in concentration behind their masks. They moved with purpose, despite the unease gripping the air. He knew they trusted him, trusted their training, but this mission was testing them in ways even the SEALs hadn't anticipated. The Galactic Marines, trailing behind, were struggling. Their larger suits, built for brute strength and advanced technology, weren't suited for the narrow confines of the cave. Jack could hear Drax's voice through the comms, barking orders to his men, frustration sharpening each word. We're getting bogged down, Ryan, Drax finally spat. This cave is a death trap. We should pull back. Jack didn't slow his pace. No turning back now, Captain. We push through, or we don't make it out at all. There was a pause, and Jack knew Drax was biting back his anger. The tension between them had been brewing since the first mission, and it was coming to a head in the worst possible place. Fine, Drax growled. But if we lose anyone down here, that's on you. Jack didn't respond. He knew Drax was rattled. His tech-heavy approach had crumbled in the face of nature's unpredictability, and now he was feeling the pressure. But Jack had no room for egos, not with the mission hanging in the balance. He signaled to his team to move deeper, into the heart of the caves. The sonar blips grew closer. Whatever was ahead of them was moving fast, circling, as if it knew they were coming. Jack's gut tightened. They were being watched. Miller, get ready. This thing's not going to let us slip by unnoticed, Jack ordered. His team shifted into combat mode, adjusting their weapons, their focus narrowing. The water around them seemed to darken, the weight of the cave pressing even harder. Suddenly, the sonar flared. Whatever had been circling was closing in. Contacts incoming! Miller shouted, his voice barely masking the adrenaline surge. The cave ahead erupted in a swirl of water and movement. Jack caught a glimpse of sleek forms darting toward them, enemy combatants, adapted to the environment, their movements swift and aggressive. Engage! Jack commanded, his voice clear, even as his pulse quickened. The SEALs sprang into action, their underwater weapons discharging silently but deadly. The enemy was fast, but the SEALs were faster, their training taking over as they weaved through the chaos, precise and controlled. The Galactic Marines, however, were floundering. Their bulky exosuits made them slow targets, and the confined space worked against them. Jack could hear the panic in Drax's voice as he ordered his men to regroup, but the enemy was relentless, swarming the Marines with precision strikes. Commander, the Marines are pinned down! Miller shouted, taking down an enemy with a swift shot. Jack gritted his teeth. He could see the situation unraveling. Drax and his team were outmatched in this environment. Despite the tension between them, Jack knew leaving the Marines to fend for themselves would only jeopardize the mission. Cover them! Jack ordered. We can't lose them here. The SEALs shifted tactics, drawing the enemy's focus away from the struggling Marines. Jack moved with lethal efficiency, his team falling into sync as they carved a path through the opposition. Slowly, the pressure eased as the enemy began to retreat, slipping back into the shadows of the cave. The water stilled, and for a moment, only the sound of labored breathing filled the calms. Jack looked back at the Marines. Several of them were injured, their suits damaged, but they were alive. Thanks for the assist, Drax muttered, his pride clearly still stinging. Couldn't have done it without you. Jack didn't gloat. We're not out of this yet. Get your team back on their feet. We've got a base to hit. The Marines regrouped, their movements slower but more deliberate now. The weight of the earlier tension hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. Drax, humbled by the reality of the situation, was quieter, his arrogance dulled by the near disaster. As they moved deeper into the caves, the terrain grew more hostile. The walls narrowed, and the floor became uneven, with jagged rocks jutting out at unpredictable angles. The water was thicker here, colder, making every movement feel like pushing through syrup. Commander, we're approaching the base, Miller reported. Thermals are picking up activity inside. They know we're coming. Jack glanced at the holographic map projected in his visor. The enemy stronghold was just beyond the next tunnel, a wide chamber that opened up into their operations hub. It would be heavily guarded, and the element of surprise was gone. We go in fast, hit them hard, Jack said, tightening his grip on his weapon. No hesitation. Drax, floating beside him, gave a reluctant nod. We'll follow your lead. Jack signaled his team, and they moved into position. The tunnel ahead widened, revealing the entrance to the enemy base. Lights flickered inside, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The enemy was waiting for them. With a final hand signal, Jack led the charge, his team surging forward. The clash was immediate, bullets and energy weapons cutting through the water, the chamber erupting in a chaotic dance of light and shadow. Jack moved through it all with deadly precision, his SEALs fighting beside him, their focus unbreakable. But even as they fought, Jack could feel the tension building. This wasn't just a battle, it was a test. And the real challenge was still ahead. The enemy stronghold loomed ahead, the dim lights flickering in the dark water like ghostly beacons. Jack Ryan's heart pounded steadily in his chest, but his mind was laser-focused. His SEALs flanked him, moving with the silent precision they'd honed over years of training. Behind them, the Galactic Marines were regrouping, shaken but ready to follow Jack's lead. "Thermals are picking up heavy movement inside," Miller reported over the comms. "They're fortified." "Doesn't matter," Jack replied, his voice calm but firm. "We go in, neutralize the target, and get out clean." There was no room for error. The base wasn't just a tactical position, it was the heart of the enemy's operations on this water world. Taking it down would cripple their ability to continue the fight, but that also meant it would be heavily defended. Jack's thoughts moved quickly, calculating the risks, adjusting the plan on the fly. There was no backup, no support. They were it. "Ready?" he asked his team, knowing the answer before they gave it. The SEALs nodded, their faces set behind their masks, their resolve unshakable. They were born for this, taught to thrive in the impossible, to adapt when everything else failed. "Let's move," Jack signaled, and his team slipped forward through the dark water, the base looming ever closer. The chamber opened up before them, vast and cold, the enemy waiting like shadows in the depths. As soon as they entered, chaos erupted. Weapons fired from every corner of the room, beams of light slicing through the murky water. The SEALs moved swiftly, dodging fire, using the environment to their advantage. Jack felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, his instincts kicking in. Every move was calculated, every shot precise. His focus narrowed to the task at hand. "Miller, take the left flank. Sanders, cover the rear," Jack ordered, his voice steady amidst the chaos. "We break through, clear a path to the command center." The SEALs responded instantly, fanning out with the seamless coordination that made them the best. As they advanced, Jack caught a glimpse of the Galactic Marines following behind. They were struggling, still too reliant on their bulky suits and high-tech gear, unable to adapt to the fluidity of the fight. Drax's voice crackled over the comms. "We're pinned down. We need cover!" Jack swore under his breath. The Marines were becoming a liability. "Hold your position. We'll clear it." The SEALs adjusted their strategy, targeting the enemy positions, pinning down the Marines. With sharp, surgical strikes, they neutralized the threats, giving the Marines room to breathe. But Jack knew they couldn't babysit them for long. The real target was still ahead, the command center. "Commander, I'm seeing movement in the control room," Miller reported. "They're locking it down. We're running out of time." Jack gritted his teeth. They couldn't afford a delay. The command center was the key to everything, their only chance to cripple the enemy's operations for good. He looked at the narrowing path ahead, the fortified door sealing off their target. "We take that door now," Jack said, pushing forward with renewed urgency. His team followed without hesitation, their movements a blur of efficiency as they cut through the final line of defense. The door loomed in front of them, thick and impenetrable. "Damn thing's reinforced," Sanders said, inspecting it quickly. "This'll take time to breach." Jack glanced back at the Marines. Drax was catching up, his men in rough shape but still moving. Jack made a split-second decision. "Drax, you and your team hold this position. We'll handle the breach." Drax hesitated, the frustration still clear in his posture, but he nodded. "Understood. We've got your back." Jack turned to Miller and Sanders. "Get that door open. We're not leaving here without finishing this." The next few minutes were a blur of sparks and tension as Sanders worked on the breach. The enemy fire continued to hammer their position, and Jack's team held the line, returning fire with deadly precision. Every second felt like an eternity. "Almost there," Sanders muttered, his hands moving rapidly over the controls. "Just a little more." A loud hiss cut through the water, and the doors slid open with a grinding sound. The command center lay beyond, dimly lit and eerily quiet. Jack didn't waste a second. "Go!" he ordered, and his team surged forward, into the heart of the enemy's operations. Inside, they found what they were looking for: control consoles, communication arrays, and the nerve center of the base. Enemy personnel scrambled to respond, but they were too late. Miller and the rest of the SEALs moved with lethal efficiency, taking down targets and securing the room in a matter of moments. Jack focused on the central console, his hands moving quickly over the alien interface. "Commander, we've got it," Miller reported, standing over the last enemy officer, who lay unconscious at his feet. "The base is ours." Jack nodded but didn't relax. "Good. Now let's make sure they can't use it again." He worked quickly, setting the system to overload. The enemy had rigged the base with failsafes, but Jack's team had come prepared. Within moments, the countdown was initiated. The base would self-destruct, wiping out the enemy's operations and sealing the caves for good. "Time to go," Jack said, his voice sharp. "We've got 3 minutes before this place blows." They moved fast, the urgency of the situation driving them forward. The Marines fell in behind them, following Jack's lead as they retraced their steps through the caves. The tremors began almost immediately, the walls shaking with the force of the impending explosion. "Move, move, move!" Jack shouted as the passage began to collapse around them. The water churned, debris falling from the ceiling, but they pressed on, the exit drawing closer with every stroke. Just as they reached the open water, a final blast rocked the caves, sending a shockwave rippling through the ocean. The base was gone, sealed beneath tons of rock and water. Jack surfaced, gasping for air, his eyes scanning the horizon. His team surfaced beside him, exhausted but alive. The Galactic Marines followed, their expressions a mixture of relief and disbelief. Drax floated nearby, staring at the churning water where the base had been. He looked at Jack, his pride clearly bruised, but there was something else in his eyes now: respect. "Guess we did it your way after all," Drax said quietly. Jack, still catching his breath, nodded. "It's not about how. It's about getting it done." The mission was over, but Jack knew this was just the beginning. There would be more battles, more tests. But for now, they had won.